Hey guys, welcome to another episode of All Things Reviewed. Today we're looking at the new Spider-Man A New Day. I'm just looking deeper into it. I heard it did really well at the box office. I haven't got a chance to see it yet, but I'm just researching why it did really well, right? So let's get into it.
Cinematic event that brought together three generations of Spider-Man and their most iconic villains, all while laying the groundwork for Tom Holland's
Yeah, that
future.
was
The film was a monstrous success, pulling in a casual $1.95 billion worldwide. But that massive win created an even bigger problem. After delivering something that epic, how on earth do you make a sequel that actually lives up to the hype? Today, we're going to talk about how Marvel and Sony basically sweat blood behind the scenes to make Brand New Day a reality. So let's do it. The No Way Home finale was a surgical strike. Wiping Peter Parker from everyone's memory didn't just move the plot forward, it ripped him out of the MCU's safety net and killed the comfortable environment Marvel and Sony had built around him. No billion-dollar Stark tech, no Avengers compound to retreat to. He is dumped into a freezing, dilapidated New York apartment with a sewing machine and a police scanner. It is the ultimate narrative reset button. After No Way Home, Tom Holland promised that Peter was entering a completely different phase of his life, one where multiversal adventures were officially off the table. But Kevin Feige's manifesto was far more specific. Feige made a promise. They are finally allowing Tom Holland to be a proper Spider-Man, a street-level hero who is suffocating under the weight of his own guilt. In retrospect, No Way Home functioned as a symbolic origin story. It cleared the path for Tom's Peter Parker to evolve into a version of the character that aligns more closely with the essence of the comics. While Marvel Studios had a clear character-driven vision post No Way Home, the path to greenlighting a fourth film wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Sony owns the film rights
I didn't even know. I thought it would have been easy.
to the character. If they weren't fully on board with Marvel's creative,
So only Sony owns the film rights, Marvel does the production. So this is kind of cool. I think all three Spider-Mans are pretty cool. Like all of them have like a version of themselves. That No Way Home was pretty sick. I forgot what the second movie was. I kind of like that one the least. With
pivot, the entire project would have hit a dead end. The first major hurdle was the director's chair. John Watts, who helmed Tom Holland's first trilogy, was the obvious pick for Sony. Executives led by Chairman Tom Rothman pushed hard to keep him on board. To them, Watts was a safe bet, a guaranteed formula for another billion-dollar blockbuster. The friction was obvious. Feige and Tom had promised something entirely new, yet Sony was still determined to play it safe. Both companies were publicly teasing their own vision for the fourth film. They didn't outright contradict each other, but they were miles away from being on the same page. Ultimately, Watts decided to walk away. After surviving the absolute nightmare of shooting a multiversal epic during peak COVID without a finished script, the guy was just completely burned out. Watts left the MCU entirely, even dropping out the Fantastic Four reboot. Kevin Feige was totally on board with the exit. Even though Watts delivered an incredible trilogy, Feige knew that heading into this darker street-level era, the franchise desperately needed fresh blood and a completely new vibe. While all this was going down, Sony was desperately trying to force its own cinematic universe using whatever Spider-Man villains they still had the rights to. The only character they actually managed to build a successful franchise around was Venom, and Sony clung to him like a life raft. They knew that if they could just find a way to smash Tom Hardy's Venom and Tom Holland's Spider-Man together, they could finally drag the MCU audience over to care about their own disconnected cinematic universe. So in the post-credits scene of Venom 3, they just threw in Null with absolutely zero plan and without even giving Marvel Studios a heads up. Sony's grand vision was basically forcing an Avengers-level threat. They wanted this massive crossover event heavily rumored to be called Spider-Man King in Black, where Null tries to swallow the entire multiverse in darkness, forcing Spider-Man and Venom to team up and stop him. But in the end, Marvel Studios actually won the tug of war with a massive assist from Tom Holland. Now wielding a lot more creative control behind the scenes, Holland pushed hard for a street-level movie. Sony's ridiculous plans to make Spider-Man 4 all about Null got completely tossed in the trash. This meant Marvel finally locked down the creative freedom to tell a truly grounded story. And just like that, we were stepping into a brand new day. Once they locked in the street-level story and scrapped the multiverse crossover, Marvel and Sony got to work putting together the cast and crew for the next era of Spider-Man. To take over for Jon Watts and give the franchise a totally fresh look and vibe, Marvel brought on Destin Daniel Cretton to direct. Cretton tackled the project with a massive amount of love for that classic gritty comic book aesthetic. He plastered the art department with old-school comic covers, using them as the ultimate mood board for the movie's cinematography and tone. Destin really wanted to prioritize the combat and give Peter a distinct fighting style. He pushed for this so much that he is reportedly bringing in the same Jackie Chan stunt team he worked with on Shang-Chi. It's clear that Destin wants everything to feel as real as possible. You can really see this visual shift in how they actually shot the movie. Instead of relying on a ton of green screen like No Way Home, they went all in on practical stunts, physical sets, and shooting on location in places like Glasgow, Scotland, and Pinewood Studios. They really wanted to make Spider-Man's world feel raw and grounded in reality. Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, the writers behind Tom Holland's entire trilogy, returned for this fourth installment, teaming up with acclaimed playwright Justin Kuritsky, the writer responsible for the movie Challenger. At Sony's CinemaCon panel in March 2025, they revealed the movie's title and announced it would hit theaters on July 31st, 2026.
It feels different this time, somehow. It's also the first time we've ever had fans on set for day one, so it's really exciting to share this with them.
Even after that brutal memory-wiping spell at the end of No Way Home, the core squad is back. Zendaya returns as MJ, along with Jacob Batalon as Ned Leeds, totally moved on and living their best lives with zero clue about Peter's identity or everything they went through together. Peter is totally isolated in a tiny apartment, the exact same one from the end of No Way Home, working shifts at Delmar's Deli Grocery just to scrape by. The idea here is pretty obvious. Peter has completely buried himself in the Spider-Man persona. He couldn't care less about Peter Parker's life anymore. He just wants to be the hero. But using the suit as an escape is definitely going to catch up with him.
Nice flowers.
Oh, they're a housewarming gift.
I'm MJ.
I'm just a neighbor from across the hall.
Friendly neighbor.
Peter is teaming up with two totally different heroes in this movie. Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner and John Bernthal's Frank Castle. Bringing Bruce Banner into the mix actually serves a massive biological purpose in the story. All that crazy psychological stress from being a full-time vigilante and dealing with total isolation starts triggering a dangerous, uncontrollable physical mutation in Peter. His powers are evolving in a fast and violent way. We're talking organic webs and some genuinely terrifying shots where his eyes go completely pitch black as he loses himself to pure aggression. When it comes down to it, Banner is basically the MCU's #1 expert on uncontrollable, rage-fueled mutations, making him the exact guy Peter needs.
Could you get rid of the bad aspects but keep the good?
How would you? Marvel did a really good job with the Hulk. Banner, and this Mark Ruffalo's like probably the best Hulk I've seen.
You decide what parts of nature are good or bad.
And judging from the trailers, we are finally going to get Savage Hulk back on screen. And Peter is the one who has to handle that entire situation. On the flip side, we have the Punisher, who acts as a super dark ideological mirror to Spider-Man. John Bernthal is officially back as Frank Castle, stepping right out of his Disney Plus special, The Punisher: One Last Kill. And he is here to show us the brutal, unforgiving reality of street-level crime. Kevin Feige has even pointed out that this version of the Punisher isn't holding back.
Bunch of clowns, you know that? Think you know my pain? What do you know about me?
To understand the potential dynamic between Spider-Man and the Punisher on screen, one must first look to their shared history on the page, which begins in the issue The Amazing Spider-Man 129, published in 1974. Frank Castle was not introduced as a hero or even an anti-hero. He was an antagonist. The story opens with Jackal hiring the Punisher to assassinate Spider-Man. The Jackal had convinced Castle that Spider-Man was a murderer responsible for the recent death of Gwen Stacy. Frank and Spidey meet and start fighting. The Jackal gets impatient and attacks Spider-Man from behind. Punisher immediately calls out his boss for his unjust methods. Frank has a code of honor. He might be a killer, but he believes in a certain kind of fairness in a fight. After Spider-Man gets away, both he and the Punisher separately look for a gunsmith called the Mechanic. Spider-Man gets there first and finds the Mechanic dead. When the Punisher arrives moments later, he assumes Spider-Man is the killer. They fight again, but this time Spider-Man manages to take Castle down and proves he's innocent by showing him the Jackal's obvious claw marks on the body. Realizing he was played, the Punisher swears to get revenge on the Jackal and storms off. This debut establishes the core of their dynamic. They are not simple enemies. They are two men with fundamentally opposed worldviews who exist on different sides of a critical moral line, yet they can find common ground against a greater evil. Their relationship is built on conflict. One of the most debated parts of Brand New Day's whole development was casting Stranger Things star Sadie Sink in a super secret, heavily guarded role. Sony and Marvel went into total lockdown over her character, which kicked off months of crazy rumors that she could be playing anyone from Spider-Gwen to some multiversal variant of MJ. But thanks to industry insiders, some major leaks, and fans overanalyzing every single frame of the trailers, it all points to one massive reveal. Sadie Sink is playing a young, morally gray version of Jean Grey. This is huge because it marks one of the MCU's first real introductions to the X-Men in a mainline movie.
I didn't really like the casting of a villain, but I mean they went there, so
Completely outside of those quick multiversal cameos. Jean is going to be on the run, totally setting the stage for how differently the world is going to look at mutants. It might seem a little weird having Jean in a Spider-Man movie, but introducing the mutant era in a film that's probably going to hit $1 billion at the box office, I think it makes total sense just to get people
do like 2 billion, bro.
hype for Jean's next adventure. On top of that, it has also been confirmed that Yelena Belova will be making an appearance in the movie.
Your appearance was okay.
To really bring New York's criminal underworld to life, Cretton pulled together an awesome lineup of villains and allies. Fresh off her Emmy win for The Bear, Liza Kalan-Zaya steps into the super important role of Detective Jean DeWolf. DeWolf is this tough, no-nonsense police captain and one of the very few real friends Spidey has in the NYPD. Bringing her in adds a grounded human look at all the vigilante chaos happening on the streets. On the villain side, the movie is finally paying off a tease from way back in 2017's Homecoming by bringing back Michael Mando as Matt Gargan, but this time he's going full Scorpion. On top of that, we're getting Marvin Jones III, who actually voiced the character in Into the Spider-Verse, making the jump to live action as Tombstone. He's stepping up as a ruthless crime boss trying to take over the New York underworld. As if physical threats weren't enough, Tremel
He was sick in Black Lightning.
Tillman joins the cast as William Bill Metzger. He's the ruthless new head of the Department of Damage Control, and he's specifically leading the anti-mutant operations to relentlessly hunt down Sadie Sink's character. Brand New Day is also throwing in guys like Tarantula, Boomerang, and another interesting detail is that the Hand is actually going to be involved in the movie. We still don't know exactly how big of a role the group plays, but judging by what we see in the trailer, it looks like we're getting a massive action set piece with Spidey going up against them. It looks like Brand New Day is going to be exactly the movie that Spider-Man fans need, and the
opening weekend was crazy, $1 billion in like 4
one the MCU's Peter needs right now. Something more personal, but at the same time epic and street level. With Destin Daniel Cretton directing, bringing in heavy hitters like the Punisher to test Peter's morals, adding some creepy biological mutation stuff, and smoothly introducing mutants with Sadie Sink as Jean Grey. This movie is going to completely shake up Spidey's future on screen.
Yeah, I want to find out how Marvel and Sony splits the Spider-Man revenue.
In 2021, No Way Home absolutely took over theaters. It was a massive cinematic event that brought together 3 generations of Spider-Men and their most iconic villains, all while
Shoot, my bad. Yeah, let's hear this one.
Spider-Man is unquestionably one of the most popular and beloved superheroes of all time. And because of that popularity, every time a new show or movie gets announced, whether it's Spider-Man Noir on Amazon Prime or your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man on Disney Plus, we get flooded with the question, wait, I thought Sony owned that, or why isn't this in the MCU? So today, we're going to take some time and dive into the complex world of the Spider-Man rights. Who gets to make the movies? Who gets to use which characters? Who pays for it? Who controls animation? What about television? We're going to get into all of that and more, so let's buckle in. First, let's start with the foundation.
Do you even think about Spider-Man Noir? That's a pretty good one actually. Yeah, it was pretty good on Disney Plus.
Foundation. Who owns Spider-Man? A lot of people get confused over this one. Many think Sony owns Spider-Man. They don't. The first thing we need to understand is this foundational concept. Marvel owns Spider-Man while Sony controls Spider-Man, at least to a degree, at least when it comes to movies and live action and some animation, but we'll get into those complexities later. In a very basic way, think of it like a house that a person named Marvel owns. They sign a rental agreement to a person named Sony to lease it and live in it. Now, even though Marvel owns the house, they can't use it, they can't swim in its pool or live in it as long as that rental agreement is in effect. It's Sony's house to use and live in and control. Marvel can only come over and play in its yard as long as Sony invites them to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I see what he's saying. But Sony, in real theory, Sony owns Sony owns Spider-Man because they'll never give up this house. This house is making too much money.
But now I'm convoluting the analogy. You get what I'm talking about. So how did this situation all come to be? Well, back in 1999, Marvel was in bad financial shape. They were just coming out of bankruptcy and they needed capital. To raise that capital, they started selling off licensing deals to a bunch of their characters like X-Men, Fantastic Four, Hulk, Blade, and others. One of those deals, the one they probably regret the most, was to sell the rights to Spider-Man to Sony. It was a perpetual license, meaning that as long as Sony begins production on a new film every 5 years and 9 months, I don't know why it's 5 years and 9 months, but that's what it is, they keep the rights forever. Yes, forever. Now, considering how popular Spider-Man is and considering just the standalone Spider-Man movies have made a combined $9 billion at the box office, how much do you think Sony paid for those rights? $2 billion? $3 billion?
I think it was $25K.
Not even close. Sony bought the forever rights to this $9 billion franchise for just $7 million. That's right, just $7 million. Theoretically speaking, Spider-Man films have already made over 1,000 times Sony's initial investment. You think Marvel has seller's remorse? On a side note, did you know that according to the book, The Big Picture, the fight
Yeah, but Marvel couldn't make the movies though.
for the Future of Movies by Ben Fritz, when Sony was negotiating the deal for Spider-Man, Marvel head Ike Perlmutter actually offered Sony the film rights to almost its entire catalog, including Iron Man, Thor, Black Panther, and the Avengers, for roughly $25 million. $25 million for all of it. And when Sony's negotiator took that offer back to the executives at Sony, their response to him was, and I quote, "Nobody gives a shit about any of the other Marvel characters. Go back and do a deal for only Spider-Man." Okay, now let's look at two other extremely important.
But at the time, he was right though. I mean, the Marvel universe made those characters big. That's the only thing they had left, and then they made it into something big, right? But at the time, no one did though. He's actually correct.
Events. The amendments to the original Spider-Man deal that took place in 2015 and the one that took place in 2019. The deal in 2015 changed the Marvel movie landscape forever, and it brought Spider-Man into the MCU.
Yay!
Under this agreement, Sony retained full control of the Spider-Man film rights and continued to finance, market, and distribute the standalone Spider-Man movies. But Marvel Studios, led by Kevin Feige, would creatively produce the films and integrate the character into the MCU. Now, this meant Spider-Man could finally appear alongside characters like Iron Man and Captain America, beginning with Captain America Civil War in 2016. Financially, the deal was structured so that Sony paid for the standalone Spider-Man films and kept the vast majority of the box office revenue, while Disney received a small percentage, reportedly around 5% of first dollar gross. Spider-Man was in the MCU and Sony made loads of money from it. It was a win-win. That is until the enormous success of Spider-Man Far From Home in 2019, which made over $1.1 billion.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Disney now wanted a bigger piece of the Spider-Man pie than just 5%. So a new deal was announced in September of 2019 that changed the structure. For future Spider-Man films, beginning with Spider-Man No Way Home, Marvel and Sony agreed to co-finance the films. Sony would pay for 75% of the production costs and keep 75% of the profits, while Disney would now cover 25% of the production costs and keep 25% of the profits. Sony still retains control of the Spider-Man film rights and handles distribution, but Marvel now has a much larger financial share and continues to creatively produce the films through Marvel Studios. It's also important to note
It's complicated, but it makes sense. So Sony does distribution, part of the production, and then Marvel does 25% as well.
that it's different for the bigger ensemble MCU movies that Spider-Man simply appears in as a smaller part of a larger ensemble. So for movies like Captain America Civil War or Infinity War, Disney pays 100% of the production costs and keeps 100% of the revenue. Sony isn't involved other than having some input and veto power over.
No, but Sony gets paid like pretty much a Spider-Man appearance fee kind of thing, which is probably like a couple million actually.
Exactly how Spider-Man is used or presented in those films. Okay, so now you may be wondering, well, why can Disney make things like Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man for Disney Plus? If Sony controls all the rights, how can they do that? That's a great question. The issue of who has the rights to produce stuff is a complex web. Anyway, so let's untangle it. Here's how it all breaks down. Live action movies. Sony has full control over live action movies. Marvel cannot make any live action Spider-Man film or any of Spider-Man's characters without Sony's direct permission and involvement. Got it? Easy enough. What about animated movies? Same thing. Sony has full control and rights for animated Spider-Man movies and his connected characters. So, for example, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, that's a Sony film. Under the current terms of their deal, you will not be seeing Disney making any animated Spider-Man movies. Well, what about streaming for these movies after they leave theaters? That's another great question. Because Sony is the distributor, all Spider-Man movies fall under the Sony Netflix deal. This means that after the theatrical and digital PVOD runs, Spider-Man hits Netflix first for an exclusive 18-month window. Only after those 18 months are up can Sony move the movie over to Disney Plus for the second window. So if you want to see Spider-Man Brand New Day as soon as it hits streaming, you're going to need Netflix. Okay, so the movies are pretty straightforward. Sony controls everything. But when we get to TV, it gets a little bit more complicated depending on the situation. So for live action TV shows, like the movies, this is all Sony. Sony and only Sony has the rights to do any Spider-Man connected live action TV shows. A perfect example of this is the upcoming Spider-Man Noir series. Disney cannot do these. Okay, well, what about animated TV shows? Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. See, Marvel and Sony both have the rights to make animated Spider-Man TV shows with one big distinction. A Marvel-produced Spider-Man animated show must be under 44 minutes. This is why the average length of an episode of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man on Disney Plus is just 29 minutes long. Sony can also produce any Spider-Man animated series at once, but they can only do so if their episodes are over 44 minutes in length. So far, they haven't made any of these. So, for animated Spider-Man stuff on TV, Marvel under 44 minutes, Sony over 44 minutes. I mean, really, it's Marvel 30-minute episodes and Sony an hour-long episodes, but you get the point. Okay, so what about all the characters associated with Spider-Man? Why can Sony make films like Morbius or Kraven, and why did they? Well, according to the terms of the deal, Sony has the rights to roughly 900 characters associated with Peter Parker. If they debuted in a Spider-Man comic, Sony likely controls their film and TV future. There are a few exceptions for characters who originated in other comics but are heavily tied to Spidey, or the other way around, like Kingpin. You see, in practice, Marvel can use Kingpin in Daredevil because he's a Daredevil villain, but Sony can technically use him in a Spider-Man movie like Into the Spider-Verse because he debuted in The Amazing Spider-Man number 50. Now, don't worry too much about this because the list of characters who would fall under this exception is very, very, very small. Now, so far, almost all the terms of this Marvel and Sony deal seem to favor Sony to one degree or another. But wait, there is one area of this deal that heavily and lucratively favors Marvel, and that is merchandise. When it comes to merchandising, Disney made out huge. In 2011, Sony was cash-strapped and sold the merchandising rights back to Marvel and Disney for a one-time payment of $175 million. Today, every time you buy a Spider-Man toy, t-shirt, or a lunchbox, whether it's for a Tom Holland movie or a Spider-Verse movie, Disney gets 100% of that money. This is a huge reason why Disney is willing to play ball with Sony. The movies are essentially just 2-hour commercials for the Disney toy line. All right, now we got to take a second and talk about those mandatory Spider-Man traits. Now, when Marvel sold the license to Sony, they wanted to make sure Sony didn't go crazy and fundamentally change their valuable character. So they created a set of rules that both Sony and Marvel would adhere to when dealing with Peter Parker and Spider-Man. These rules became public during the 2014 Sony hack. Now, rules for the Spider-Man persona: he must be male. He must not use foul language. He does not smoke. He does not use or distribute drugs, and he does not have sex before 16. Sorry, young Peter, no filthy for you. Now, for Peter Parker's persona specifically, he must be Caucasian. He must be heterosexual. His parents became absent during his childhood. He is raised by an aunt and uncle in Queens, and he gains his powers during middle school or college from a spider bite. Standard stuff. Now, clearly, these Parker rules only apply to Peter Parker specifically. Characters like Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy, they don't apply here. Some exceptions can be made to these rules if specifically agreed upon by both Marvel and Sony. Obviously, we can't cover every single detail of the hundreds and thousands of pages of legal documents and contracts, but I hope this gives you at least a general understanding of how the Spider-Man deal works between Sony and Marvel, who gets to do what, who pays for what, and why the deal has been extremely lucrative for both of them. So, all that's left now is for us to anxiously await the arrival of Spider-Man Brand New Day, the latest collaboration between Sony and Marvel to hit our theaters, and I can't wait, and it's going to make both of them unholy amounts of money. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. My name is John Campia, and until next time, my friends.
Nice. That was good. Complicated, but good. Yeah, let's hear this one and then call it a day.
Captain Midnight.
This video will contain spoilers. So, I loved this one. Spider-Man Brand New Day is of course the first MCU Spider-Man movie without John Watts at the helm. And though I know it's become very popular to dislike those movies online now, if you've been watching me for a while, you know that I really enjoyed the home trilogy. So I was very interested, and a little nervous, to see what Destin Daniel Cretton would do behind the camera, with this series clearly going in a new direction after No Way Home. The trailers were promising, but seemed to show off a movie that could be really overstuffed, which has happened to the MCU on many occasions. Thankfully, I shouldn't have worried, because Brand New Day pulls it all off, and makes it look kind of easy too. I'm just very excited to talk about this one, to be honest. Before I do, I did want to let you know that I will be getting on camera to talk about something I'm pretty excited about at the end of this video.
Hey, tough guy. Sorry about that expensive lens, Punisher.
You know, I do it again because I'm just so happy that it exists out there in the world. And the plan now...
Okay, now
by the time No Way Home came out...
Let's watch this one. They're talking about how Spider-Man's broken down, how they reversed the order for this Spider-Man versus the previous Spider-Mans. Well, I thought it was good, pretty good.
The argument about Tom Holland's Spider-Man had been running for 5 years. Iron Boy Jr. Too comfortable, too supported, missing the whole point of the character.
Look at little Iron Boy Jr. Gonna cry?
I sat with that argument for a long time. My last video made the case that No Way Home finally gave Peter the origin the MCU had been deferring. The loss, the guilt, the isolation, all of it arriving in the third act the way those other versions had it from the beginning. And I still think that's true. But that video didn't answer the question that kept bothering me. If Marvel understood Spider-Man well enough to make No Way Home, and the writers clearly did, why did they spend 6 years making the version everyone called Iron Boy Jr.? Why did they build 2 films that felt so comfortable for a character who's never supposed to be comfortable? Going back through all 3 films, I think the answer is the same reason you have to read the whole paragraph before the punchline makes sense. The things that looked like problems in Homecoming and Far From Home were load-bearing. Remove them, and the ending collapses. Marvel spent 3 films building a version of Peter Parker with friends, mentors, technology, a future, and then took all of it away. The other versions never had any of that to lose. Marvel built that comfort deliberately, and it only makes sense from the end. By 2014, Sony had made 5 Spider-Man films across 2 franchises. The internal emails from the 2014 hack showed executives debating whether to sell the character back to Marvel, with a buyout figure somewhere between $1 and $5 billion. That's not a negotiating posture. That's a studio with no idea what to do next. To understand how we got here, you need to know what Sony was trying to escape. Raimi's first 2 films were, for the record, genuinely great. Spider-Man in 2002 was one of the highest-grossing films of the year. Spider-Man 2 is still on most people's shortlist for the best superhero sequel ever made, and I've rewatched it more times than I can count. Raimi had a vision, Maguire understood it, and audiences were on board. And then Spider-Man 3 happened. Producer Avi Arad wanted Venom in the film because Venom sold merchandise. Raimi didn't want to include him, said publicly he didn't understand the character, and put him in anyway because he didn't have a choice. The franchise Raimi had carefully built over 2 films collapsed under the weight of a villain he never wanted. Avi Arad later accepted the blame publicly. Sony canceled Spider-Man 4 while it was already in pre-production, so they rebooted it. As you do. The Amazing Spider-Man in 2012 was genuinely decent. Andrew Garfield was great, loose, quick, physically the right kind of awkward, and the chemistry with Emma Stone was real. I liked that film. Then The Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out, and Sony decided that 1 sequel was enough runway to launch a shared cinematic universe. 3 villains, a conspiracy subplot about Peter's parents that resolved nothing, and a universe that evaporated before a single spin-off got made. Garfield was out before the dust settled. He later said his desire to serve the character had been compromised by studio mandates cutting the scenes he'd built his whole performance around. The franchise ended not with a creative decision, but with a studio that had run out of road. Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel Studios and the person who had been building the MCU since Iron Man in 2008, walked into a lunch meeting at Sony with a completely different agenda than Amy Pascal was expecting. Pascal was Sony's co-chairwoman. She had set up the meeting hoping Feige would help consult on Amazing Spider-Man 3. Halfway through lunch, Feige told her that her plans weren't going to work. Then he proposed something else. Sony should let Marvel Studios produce the Spider-Man films entirely. Sony would keep the licensing rights, distribution, creative approval, and the box office. Marvel would handle production. Pascal later said she started crying and threw him out of her office. She called him the next day. The deal was done by February 2015. Before Marvel could build anything, they needed to figure out what the previous 5 films had actually done right. Because they weren't just running from failure, they were taking notes. Maguire's version had the emotional weight. Spider-Man 2 especially. The exhaustion, the sacrifice, the sense that Peter is one bad week from quitting. What it didn't have was energy. The Raimi films cut out almost all the combat banter. Spider-Man in the comics talks constantly during a fight, anxious, quick, self-deprecating. Maguire's Peter suffers in silence. My honest take on Maguire? He never read as the young Peter Parker. He was 27 playing 17, and it showed. But as a middle-aged, worn-down Peter who's been doing this for years, he was exactly right. Spider-Man 2 works partly because Maguire plays that exhaustion like someone who earned every bit of it, just not always for the reasons the films intended. Garfield had the energy Maguire didn't. He moved like a real teenager, had the physical lightness the role needed, and he was charming. What the web films got wrong was scale. The Oscorp conspiracy plots kept dragging everything away from the neighborhood level the character needs. And Garfield played Peter too cool. Skateboard, styled hair, the interesting one you notice immediately. Peter Parker is supposed to be the kid nobody notices. So Marvel made a literal checklist. Screenwriters Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daley described it publicly. Every element from the previous 5 films they were explicitly not doing again. No origin. No Manhattan skyscraper swinging. No Uncle Ben scene. Audiences had seen it twice. They even had a scene where Aunt May gives Peter Uncle Ben's old clothes to wear to the homecoming dance. It got cut. Daley said, "If you're going to talk about someone's death, you don't want it to be a throwaway." So they left the wound open and moved on. The casting search took 1,500 actors, 8 auditions, and 5 self-tapes across 5 months. Holland's screen test with Chris Evans? The stunt coordinator told him he couldn't legally request a backflip, but wouldn't stop one. Holland launched into a full somersault mid-scene. Evans forgot his lines. That energy is in every film Holland made. When Holland showed up in Civil War, I got genuinely excited, because it was the first time Spider-Man on screen actually felt young. Peter Parker who moves like a teenager, talks like one, reacts like one. I didn't know exactly what Marvel was going to do with that. Homecoming came out and it was different from anything I expected. Different enough that I had questions, but I didn't hate it. I stayed curious. The answer to those questions turned out to be the whole point. So what did Marvel actually build? And why does any of it matter for where this ends up? The age problem got fixed first. Maguire was 27 playing 17. Garfield was 27 too. Both of them read as young adults doing teenager things, heavy, adult, even in the high school scenes. Holland at 19 moved differently. His gymnastics background gave him a physical lightness the previous actors couldn't match. And for the first time, the combat banter that defined Spider-Man in the comics was actually present in a live-action film. The anxious, quick, running-at-the-mouth quality that Raimi's version had almost completely dropped. The screenplay leaned into this and
I like the running of the mode quality of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield was slick, charming, And then Tobey Maguire did nerdy Spider-Man really well.
In ways the previous films never tried. The stakes in Homecoming stay genuinely small. Peter misses the homecoming dance because he's chasing an arms dealer. He gets detention for sneaking out of school, then sits through a Captain America public service announcement about patience. The academic decathlon trip to Washington, D.C. doubles as cover for tracking the Vulture across state lines. Superhero problems inside teenage problems. And the combination genuinely works. John Watts had his cast watch John Hughes films before shooting. The backyard sprint makes that explicit. Peter chasing the Vulture's crew through the suburbs of Queens, crashing through fences, startling dogs, while a TV in someone's living room plays the exact same backyard sprint from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That's not a throwaway reference. Watts was telling you exactly what kind of film this was. When Holland first appears in Civil War, already Spider-Man, 6 months in, suit already made, Tony Stark asks him why he does any of this. Peter doesn't hesitate.
When you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
Marvel rebooted the entire emotional core of the character in one line, without once saying great power or great responsibility. Pretty good for a teenager in a bedroom in Queens. The villain problem got a clever solution too. Give Spider-Man world-ending threats, and the neighborhood hero thing stops making sense. Adrian Toomes fixes that. A salvage contractor who lost a city contract to Tony Stark's Department of Damage Control after the Battle of New York, built a side business selling reclaimed alien weapons, and ran it quietly for 8
I liked how they put Spider-Man in the MCU universe. That was pretty cool.
years before Peter stumbled onto it. The conflict is local, economic, personal. Early drafts had Toomes as Peter's science teacher, which would have been fine. Goldstein and Daly changed it deliberately to keep Toomes separate from Peter's school life, and crash both worlds together at the homecoming dance. That one decision is why the car scene works. Peter's in the back seat. Toomes is in the front.
The biggest thing is just Marvel and Sony creative differences. I think they'll do the Venom thing. I think the Venom crossover would be good. It's just a matter of when. I think they could do the Venom crossover as the next movie. That would be cool. I can't believe Tom Holland's will get like 5 Spider-Man movies. That's pretty cool.
Front. 10 minutes. No action. Almost no dialogue from Peter. Toomes works out who he's looking at in real time. The timing, the tech, the age. And the film gives Peter nothing to say. He just sits there while the most dangerous person he's ever met figures out his secret, then offers him one chance to walk away. The traffic light shifts from red to green as Toomes finishes the calculation. That single lighting cue does what 20 minutes of exposition couldn't. And then there's the moment Homecoming gets most right, which barely gets talked about. When Stark takes the suit away and tells Peter, if you're nothing without this suit, you shouldn't have it. Peter has to go back to the version of himself that has nothing. No AI, no gadgets, no Karen giving him tactical overlays. He ends up trapped under a collapsed building in a hoodie and sweatpants. And he still lifts it. That's the film quietly proving its whole thesis. The suit was never what made him Spider-Man, but it took removing it to show you that. Marvel skipped the origin entirely. No bite shown, no Uncle Ben. When Homecoming first came out, I felt something was missing, and I think a lot of you felt it too. Like Peter was getting away with things too easily. That feeling was real. But going back through all 3 films, I think that comfort was intentional. They needed you to feel it before they could take it away. But before we get into what the comfort actually cost, there's something going on underneath these films that I think most people completely missed. Every MCU Spider-Man film opens with Peter chasing the wrong thing. In Homecoming, he wants to be an Avenger, calling Happy Hogan constantly with updates on Minor Queen's crimes, wearing the Stark suit to bed, trying to prove he's ready for the big leagues. When Tony actually offers him a spot, a new suit, a press conference, Peter turns it down. The thing he spent the whole film chasing, he walks away from the moment it's actually there. Far From Home starts with Peter trying to disappear. Tony is dead, everyone expects him to be the next Iron Man, and Peter's plan is to go on a school trip to Europe and let someone else handle it. He wants the trip. He wants MJ. He wants out. The film ends with his identity exposed to the entire world, the exact opposite of what he was trying to protect. No Way Home begins with Peter trying to keep everything, fix the exposure, get his friends into MIT, restore the life that existed a week ago. He goes to Strange and asks for a spell that makes the world forget he's Spider-Man, then interrupts it constantly to add exceptions. Keep MJ's memory, keep Ned's. He wants the benefit. A film ends with him losing everything, by his own choice, with no exceptions at all. 3 films, 3 wrong dreams. Each one dismantled by the story. Each film moves Peter one stage further from what he wanted, and one stage closer to what the character actually requires. Wanting to be Spider-Man and getting to have everything else, the relationships, the future, the normal life, those 2 things aren't compatible. And each film is Peter discovering that and not accepting it, until the 3rd one where he finally does. If you watched Homecoming and felt like Peter never had real skin in the game, like the stakes never quite landed even when the action was good, this is why. Peter spent that whole film wanting the wrong thing, and the film never made him pay enough for it. Not yet. The film was saving that payment for later. But there's something else running under all 3 films at the same time. Something the critics who hated the trilogy and the people who loved it were both missing. There's a pattern in the villains I didn't catch until I went back through all 3 films looking for it. Vulture, Mysterio, and the Green Goblin are usually described by what they are on the surface. Vulture is greed, Mysterio is deception, the Goblin is chaos. All accurate. but also attacking the exact same flaw in Peter, the desire to get what he wants without paying full price for it. In Homecoming, Peter wants Avenger status without earning it. He finds the Vulture's operation and tries to handle it alone because he wants the win. Stark takes the suit, if you're nothing without this suit, you shouldn't have it, and the third act is Peter proving he can work without it. He ends up under a collapsed building in a homemade hoodie, no AI, no gadgets, no backup. He lifts the concrete himself. The shortcut gets removed and he finds out who he is without it. In Far From Home, Peter wants someone else to carry Tony's legacy. When Mysterio shows up presenting himself as a hero, Peter hands him Edith, a global orbital weapons network that Tony named Even Dead, I'm the Hero, which honestly tells you everything you need to know about Tony. Peter hands it to a stranger he just met because he doesn't want to be responsible for it. Mysterio takes that opening. Peter defeats him in the end through spider sense alone, eyes closed, no interface, trusting only what's actually his. In No Way Home, Peter wants to solve the multiverse crisis without losing anything personal. He keeps loading exceptions onto Strange's spell because accepting the full cost is the one thing he can't do. The Goblin doesn't create the catastrophe. Peter's refusal to let go does. The Goblin fight in the apartment is deliberately stripped of every piece of Stark technology. The script has him absorb Peter's worst hits and laugh. He can't be beaten by gadgets, only by a moral choice. Same flaw, 3 different films, 3 different antagonists finding the same gap and walking through it. The writers were treating the trilogy as one continuous argument across 6 hours of film. Each villain is a different version of the same question. What are you willing to give up? And each time, Peter's answer at the start of the film is wrong. That's impressive on paper, and it all looks even more impressive when you understand what it actually cost. Whether the safety net was a problem or a plan depends on which side of the screen you're sitting on. From the audience side, the ceiling was real. You genuinely couldn't feel afraid for Peter across Homecoming and Far From Home. The Stark suit, the private jets, the orbital weapon satellite, all of it insulated him in ways that quietly drained the tension. The films felt comfortable in ways this character isn't supposed to feel comfortable. From the filmmaker's side, they were building something to collapse. John Watts confirmed publicly that the trilogy was always designed as a delayed origin story. The safety net needed to exist before it could be taken away and mean anything. Which means the trade-offs were real too, and they're worth remaining honestly. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created Spider-Man in 1962 as a teenager with no mentor and no safety net. In an era where teenagers in comics were sidekicks, Robin, Bucky, Speedy, Peter Parker was completely alone. He invented his own web shooters, sewed his own suit, figured everything out through trial and error and personal disaster, with nobody to call when it went wrong. The Stark mentorship is the direct opposite of that. 2 films of borrowed technology, borrowed validation, borrowed everything. The Iron Spider suit, nanotech, AI assist, instant kill mode, drone surveillance is the kind of gear Tony Stark spends a decade and a near-death experience building. Peter gets it as a gift at 17. Classic Peter runs out of web fluid.
Crazy how all his villains know who Spider-Man is. I guess they'll keep the secret.
But at the worst possible moment. He scrapes together money for chemicals between shifts at the Bugle. The MCU version never has to think about any of that. The clearest example is the Staten Island ferry sequence in Homecoming. Peter tries to stop a weapons deal midway through. The ferry gets split in half and he can't hold it. He's failing publicly, people are dying, and then Tony shows up with the Iron Man suit and fixes it. The film even has Tony lecture Peter about how badly he handled it, and then everything is fine. The cost of Peter's mistake is a stern conversation. If you felt like something was off in that moment, like a consequence landed but then didn't land, you were right. The safety net is visible in that exact frame. The poverty disappears too. Classic Peter worries about rent, about Aunt May's health, about whether he can afford to keep going. That material reality is what makes the heroism feel costly. You know what he's giving up because you've watched him not have.
Yeah, but this is an older Spider-Man, like his uncle is old, Aunt May is old. Yeah, he looks older, so it makes sense.
Have it. The MCU version has Happy Hogan as a personal fixer. The stakes stay emotional, they're never material. And the isolation goes. Ned finds out in the first film. MJ figures it out by the second. May knows. Happy knows. The dual life burden that makes this character lonely in every other version barely exists because there's almost nobody left to hide from. Far From Home makes all of this most visible. Peter in that film is largely passive. Nick Fury hijacks his vacation, Mysterio manipulates him, and for most of the runtime, Peter is just reacting to what other people do. The most active thing he does in the second act is hand away the most powerful weapon he's ever held to a man he just met, because carrying it himself feels like too much. He's genuinely a pawn in his own movie for a long stretch of it. These are real costs. The Spider-Man people grew up with, broke, isolated, doing it completely alone, wasn't on screen in those first 2 films. What was on screen was building towards something those 2 films couldn't pay off by themselves. Before we move on, if you're enjoying the video, like and
Man, that Spider-Man No Way Home was pretty cool with the 3 Spider-Mans. That was
subscribe. It genuinely helps. Now let's talk about the payoff. I was there first day, first show for No Way Home, waiting for this crossover the whole film. And when Tobey and Garfield finally appeared in someone's kitchen, not a rooftop, which is a whole other story, what I actually felt wasn't excitement. It was nostalgia. Pure nostalgia. Yeah. Tobey Maguire in the Spider-Man suit again. All 3 of them in the same frame. That film isn't perfect, and I'm not going to tell you it's the greatest movie, but I loved it. And the ending stayed with me longer than any MCU film had in years. The 2 spells. The first spell had unlimited exceptions. Peter couldn't let the solution cost him anything personal. He kept adding names. MJ, Ned, May, Happy, every exception another refusal to accept what fixing the problem required. Strange told him to stop. The multiverse was already destabilizing. Peter said, wait, just one more. It fractured, and 20 years of Spider-Man history poured through the gap. The second spell had none of that. Erase Peter Parker from everyone's memory. Every relationship, every friendship, every version of the future he'd spent 3 films protecting. No exceptions. The person who couldn't allow any sacrifice at the beginning becomes the person who asks for the total version at the end. That gap is the whole character arc. Aunt May doesn't say, with great power comes great responsibility. She says, with great power, there must also come great responsibility.
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
That phrasing is from the original 1962 Amazing Fantasy issue, Stan Lee's exact words, the first time he ever wrote them. It changes the line from an observation into an imperative. Marvel held it back for 3 films, saved it for this character in this moment, dying on a lobby floor, because it needed to cost something before it could mean anything. The coffee shop scene is the one that got me most. Peter has a whole speech prepared. He walks in, sees MJ and Ned, safe, happy, getting ready for MIT. He sees the scar on MJ's forehead from a battle she has no memory of. He orders a coffee. He leaves. Speech stays in his pocket. The audience knows everything. She knows nothing. No action, almost no dialogue, and it carries more weight than any fight in the film. That's what 3 films of relationship building actually buys you. And then the apartment. And the suit. Every Spider-Man before this one wore a homemade suit because he had no alternative. Raimi's Peter was a broke teenager who couldn't afford anything else. He sewed it himself out of necessity. The suit was limitation made visible. What the MCU Peter has at the end of No Way Home is the exact opposite of that. He chose a homemade suit after having had every conceivable alternative. The Iron Spider with its nanotech, the Stark Fabricator, the AI interface, drone capability, instant kill mode. He had all of it. 6 films of borrowed infrastructure.
I really like the AI Fabricator though, that was pretty cool.
And he puts it aside and picks up a needle and thread anyway. That act of choosing is something no other Spider-Man could do, because no other Spider-Man had anything to choose away from. There's a study guide on the table in that apartment. He's starting his GED, because the spell erased his school records along with everything else. And the sewing machine he's using is May's. So the first thing Peter makes that's completely his own, he builds on a tool that belonged to someone he lost. That detail didn't have to be there, but it is. The suit he finishes has no AI, no tactical overlays, no gadgets of any kind. It looks exactly like the comic book version, the classic red and blue. It doesn't look like an Avengers suit with a spider on it. It looks like Spider-Man. For the first time in the MCU, actually Spider-Man. Not Tony's project, not a hand-me-down from someone who believed in him. Something he made, from scratch, in a freezing apartment with no one watching. Now, the 3 Spider-Men. Maguire gave audiences a finished hero, someone who already knew what the mask costs and put it on every morning anyway. Garfield gave audiences grief, the weight of failing the person you loved most and carrying it everywhere after. Holland gave audiences the part that's hardest to watch, the becoming. In real time across 6 films. The other 2 arrived as Spider-Man. Holland had to get there. And this is exactly what I mean when I call it Spider-Man in reverse. Raimi's Peter loses Ben before the story begins. Holland's Peter loses everyone at the story's end. Raimi starts with responsibility and spends 3 films showing what it costs to carry it. Holland spends 3 films not understanding what responsibility actually means, and then pays for everything at once in the final act. One trilogy asks what happens after tragedy. The other asks what it takes to earn it. In the Raimi films, you never wonder whether Peter deserves the costume. In the Holland trilogy, that's the whole question. And you only get the answer in those last 10 minutes, alone in a freezing apartment, building the suit by hand, with nobody left who knows who he is. The argument about which Spider-Man is the best one isn't going to resolve. Raimi's version was built for an audience that needed earnestness and guilt. Garfield's was built for a franchise era that wanted passion and scale. Holland's was built for a shared universe already running at full speed, with an audience that had rejected 2 previous versions and needed a reason to try again. Each one is a different answer to the same question. What does this character need to be right now? The MCU's answer was uncomfortable for a while. A Peter Parker with resources, a billionaire in his corner, and a safety net under everything felt wrong to people who knew him as someone who had none of that. And they were right to notice. The discomfort was the point. You can only feel the weight of what Peter gives up in No Way Home if you watched him have it. The loneliness of that apartment lands because you were in the room when he and Ned built the Lego Death Star. That's a scene from 2 films people called too light, too comfortable, not Spider-Man enough. And it's exactly why the ending works. The coffee cup from her donut shop, the only thing left on the table. He could have kept all of it. He chose not to. That doesn't make the MCU version better than what came before, but it makes it something the other versions couldn't be. A Spider-Man you watched earn the costume, in real time, across 3 films and 6 years. The other versions started there, he ended there, and the order was the point. If you want to understand why that ending hits as hard as it does, my last video goes scene by scene through exactly that. Click on the screen.
Nice. Yeah, that's it from me, guys. Yeah, this is pretty cool. I'm glad Spider-Man's doing well. We'll just keep up. All right.